This video is about analyzing resources and capabilities. So when we think about analyzing resources and capabilities, what do we think about? Well, we want to identify, analyze, and develop the firm's resources, capabilities, and core competencies to do what? We want to create a strategy by exploiting our internal strengths and defending against internal weaknesses. So one thing that we can do is we think about which market segments and which customers will our firm's resources and capabilities strengths be most effective for. Another way to think about that is to think, what are the specific markets that we want to enter? And then what are the specific resources and capabilities that we need to be able to enter these markets successfully? We also think about our resources and capabilities to do what? To understand our potential for creating competitive advantage. And so why is the goal to understand potential? So if we don't understand potential, then the product will probably not be built. So potential is knowing that we have gas in the car, so we can think of taking a trip of 300 miles instead of just 30 miles. And so that understanding of that potential allows us to produce a good or service that will be required or will be admired by our consumer. So when we look at resources, what are those resources? Those resources are productive assets that are owned by the firm, and we have three types: tangible, intangible, and human. So tangible resources are financial resources that are physical assets that we can see on the financial statements. Intangible resources are items that are not seen. So when we think of intangible resources, these invisible assets, what are they? They are corporate culture, reputation, technology, intellectual property. They can be patents, trade secrets, copyrights. They can be the brand. So for many companies, intangible resources are actually more valuable than tangible resources. When we think of our brand, it is the value of our company, and how do we increase our brand? We increase the brand by increasing our product range. So we can think of Nike that diversified its products. We can think of Apple that has the iPod, the iPad, the iWatch, the iMac, iTunes. When we think of human resources, why do we say that those human resources are productive assets owned by the firm? The reason that we do is that those human resources have employment contracts. And typically those employment contracts are long-term contracts, and employees have a tendency to stay for longer periods of times. So this stability there is why that collection of employees and their intellectual and physical output is classified as resources for the firm. Hiroki Itami, who is a professor of management at Harvard, says that invisible assets are often the only real source of competitive edge that can be sustained over time. And he says to think of the particular technology, the consumer information, the brand name, the reputation, the corporate culture. He says that intangible assets are more valuable than tangible assets because they are built up over a long-term strategic capability rather than instant capability. When we think of capabilities, what are capabilities? Capabilities are what the firm can do better than competitors. One of the greatest capabilities is actually organizational learning. So what is the purpose of analyzing resources and capabilities? That purpose is to generate strategic implications for which market segments and which customers are a firm's resource and capability strengths most likely to be effective. So we see that there are two views. Those views are an external view and an internal view. The external view focuses on key success factors. So it's the resource view. It's understanding which resources and capabilities are required to satisfy the key success factors. What did we say key success factors were earlier? It is those things that you must get right to be able to win the sale. The other view is an internal view. And so that internal view focuses on the value chain. And this is Porter's value chain, which he created, or he hypothesized in 1985, I believe. And so that value chain has a primary set of ideas and a secondary set. So the primary set is what? It's inbound logistics, it's operations, it's outbound logistics, it's marketing and sales, it's after sales service. So those are the primary activities of the value chain. But let's not forget, what are the secondary activities of the value chain? Those are infrastructure. And when we think of infrastructure, we think of overhead costs, we think of management, we think of financing, we think of planning. When we think of the next one is human resources management. So as a secondary activity for human resource management, we think of recruiting, hiring, training, development, retention, compensation of the employees. When we think of secondary activities, we also think of technological development. So the research and development, product design, market research, process development. And then our last secondary activity is procurement. We think of sourcing of raw materials, components, equipment, and services for our products. When we think of establishing competitive advantage and sustaining competitive advantage, we understand that establishing competitive advantage requires two things. It requires scarcity, it requires relevance. So if a resource or a capability is widely available, then it will not create a competitive advantage. So therefore, if it is not scarce. Also, from a relevancy perspective, if the resource and capability is not relevant to the market's idea of key success factors, what is required in the market to succeed, then that item will not be relevant. When we think of sustaining competitive advantage, we think durability, transferability, and replicability. So an example there of durability, that the more durable the item, the more durable the advantage, then the more secure the competitive advantage. So we can contrast highly specialized equipment that perform a certain function within a very small, with a very small group of scientists, for example. So it's harder to sustain the competitive advantage of that small group of scientists than it is to use that highly specialized machinery. Why is that? Because you're always in fear, or if you do not treat your highly trained scientists. Well, those highly trained scientists may do what? They may decide to leave and start another company on their own. When we think of transferability, why is transferability required there to sustain our competitive advantage? We think of the mobility of the resources between companies. Some resources are not easily transferable. So when we think of large capital equipment, so mining equipment, oil and gas equipment, anything, big manufacturing processes. So those are not as easily transferred. And so that transferability there helps us. That lack of transferability helps us to sustain that competitive advantage. And then when we think of replicability, we think of capabilities that are built on complex organizational routines. And those complex organizational routines are less easily replicable by our competitors, and so therefore add to our competitive advantage. There is a term as well that is called time compression diseconomies. And what does that mean? Time compression diseconomies. And so what it means is other companies that want to come in, so entrants, the threat of new entrants, what do they have to do? They have to spend exponentially more money to get to the same level that the incumbent firm is at after having produced and failed and learned and made mistakes and corrected those mistakes and continue to go ahead. Those companies, new companies coming in, do not have the learning, and so therefore must pay exponentially to arrive at the same place as the incumbent company. And then how do we analyze our resources and capabilities? Well, the first step is to identify key resources and capabilities. And I see that I have 1 and 1 there. As part of that, we have to appraise our resources and capabilities. So how do we do that? We look at the importance of those resources and capabilities from a sustaining viewpoint. And then we look at our own firm strengths relative to our competitors' strengths. So when we look at the importance of our resources and capabilities sustaining our competitive advantage, we look at what is the most important there. We look at our brand strength. We look at our global distribution network. We look at our fast cycle new product development. We look at global logistics. So we look at things that we have that are allow us to sustain our competitive advantage, and then to assess our firm's strength relative to our competitors' strengths. How do we do that? We benchmark against our competitors. We compare where they are. When we develop our strategy, what is the reason, or what are we supposed to be doing? We are supposed to be exploiting our key strengths. And so we look at how we can use those key strengths to our greatest advantage. And then we want to reduce our vulnerabilities, managing our key weaknesses. So how do we do that? Oftentimes, it's to outsource, or it is to have a strategic alliance, or it may be an acquisition. But those as well are inherent dangers that we need to determine. Does that outsourcing actually put in danger our entire value chain? Does that acquisition of a new company, do we have a difference in business models? Is one a cost leader? Is one a differentiator? Do we have a difference in management styles? The other thing that we can do is when we are developing our strategy going forward, we look at our superfluous strengths. And you say, what is a superfluous strength? A superfluous strength is a particular strength that doesn't appear, notice that the key word is appear, does not appear to be important at the moment, but it is a strength. And so you can think of when you are developing newer products and looking at newer markets, how can we use those capabilities that at the moment with our current product or our current market may not be as important, but as we go into adjacent markets with adjacent products, those do become more important. So what could be a strength there? Again, foreign language being a strength. I, as the French major when I was in school, but think of if you are going to expand to other markets, international markets with products that will appeal to the international marketplace, you need an understanding of what? An understanding of that international customer. What is a good way to understand that international customer is to have those language skills, to have lived there in the area where you are hoping to market your new product. So that customer understanding and realizing that not all customers are the same. That is our understanding of our resources and our developments, understanding what our importance is so that we can develop our strategy.